It's time for Gervonta, Tank Davis, and Shakur Stevenson to go down. The fight has to happen, and I think it's now or never, because ultimately they're the best at 135. There's no debate about the best fighters at lightweight. It's got to be Shakur. It's got to be Tank. Talk about excitement and a clash of styles. We have it right here, and probably the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. People are going to say Canelo versus Crawford is the biggest fight, but I just believe that there's too many excuses. Ultimately, people are going to say Canelo's too big or that Crawford's too small. Canelo's just a puncher. You know, like, they can dumb it down. They can take credit away from that fight. But if you look at Shakur and Tank, I feel like that's really the best at 135. Even despite Tank's performance against Lamont Roach, I still think Tank and Shakur are the best at lightweight, and for that fight to go down, it would be really interesting to see, because it's a clash of styles, and ultimately you have one fighter in Tank, you know, where he's going to try to get to Shakur Stevenson. He's going to try to set up a trap for Shakur Stevenson, and Shakur is going to try to box Tank, keep him on the outside, use that jab, that rangefinder, keep him at bay, you know, touch Tank and land his shots clean, just be busier and ultimately bag rounds against Tank. But will he be able to last that long? Will Tank be able to, you know, land his shot? These are questions that would only be answered in the ring. And with Tank ultimately having that weird performance against Lamont Roach, not his best night, I feel like Shakur is going to feel more confident that he can beat Tank, but I don't think it's going to necessarily be that easy, mainly because Shakur is not Lamont Roach. And as good as Shakur Stevenson is, I think there's a good chance that he can beat Tank, honestly, because he's so defensively sound. And I feel like Tank, who tends to be a slow starter, it's going to be difficult to pick it up against a guy like Shakur Stevenson. So Tank would have to come out guns blazing against a guy like Shakur, or I feel like Shakur would probably slip away with a decision win against Tank. But if Tank is able to start fast and make Shakur fight a longer fight, and what I mean by that is don't be that fighter that Tank usually is, where you start slow. You can't do that at the elite level, and Lamont Roach proved that, right? So against a guy like Shakur, Tank would have to go straight to him and waste no time, because against Shakur, it's going to be much more difficult to land a big shot on him. And not that Tank can't outbox Shakur, because I believe he can. I think Tank's good enough. He's precise enough. His timing is good enough to outbox Shakur Stevenson, but to be safe, you try to land that big shot in the process, right? So he needs to make the fight as long as he can, and so does Shakur, but in different ways. Tank has to make the fight longer in terms of make Shakur uncomfortable from the get-go, and then in the process, you know, make that fight longer for Shakur, make it a more difficult fight, make time go slow for Shakur Stevenson, and make him really get in his defensive bag where he has to be the best version of himself, because Shakur really hasn't had to do that recently. You look at the Josh Padley fight, that's his most recent test, and I think with Shakur Stevenson's hand injuries, it's questionable on whether or not he'd be able to get the respect of Tank. You got to have something on those punches. And I'm not saying Shakur has no power, but he's not a knockout artist. He's not known to have great punching power. So taking into account his hand injuries, how sure are we that he's going to have the ability to do what Lamont Roach did and sit in the pocket in exchanges? Because he's not going to be able to avoid Tank the entire night. There are going to be moments where he's going to have to stand in front of him and exchange a little bit. I'm not saying he's going to exchange a lot, because I think Shakur is going to make it a boring fight and win by any means necessary. But there are still going to be moments, like I said, where he's going to have to fight and be careful in that pocket. In those exchanges, he's not going to be able to, you know, just move around, because he has to land his own shots, right? And in those moments, I feel like Tank is going to have to take those big risks where, you know, he throws wild shots and maybe catches Shakur and cracks him. That's what Tank has to do, but he can't wait. He can't be a slow starter against a guy like Shakur Stevenson, because Shakur will keep that door closed and not let Tank back into the fight. That's my opinion. I feel like Shakur is a very intelligent fighter, and he knows that Tank's very dangerous even after that Lamont Roach. But I also think that Shakur, like I said, isn't Lamont Roach. I don't think he'd be willing to sit in the pocket for that long with Tank and land those shots that would eventually get the respect of Tank, land those shots that would buzz Tank and make him second guess coming straight in, you know, to land a big shot. I don't know if Shakur is willing to do that. It takes guts to do that, and Shakur, I feel like he's the type to say, forget the fans, I'm going to get the win by any means necessary. But we'll only know once they fight, but I feel like the time is now. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think about Tank and Shakur. But thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next Nabs Boxing video. Peace.